Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start with a new topic, World Trade Organization. So, first, the basics. WTO is an intergovernmental organization that is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, that regulates and facilitates international trade. Governments use this organization to establish, revise, and enforce the rules that govern international trade in cooperation with the United Nations system. The WTO is the world's largest international economic organization with 166 members representing 98% of global trade and global GDP. So these basics ये सबको पता ही है सब रिवाइज याद कर लेते हैं. Now let's proceed further. WTO it facilitates trade in goods, services and intellectual property. So UPSC पर्सपेक्टिव से ये इम्पोर्टेंट है कि WTO जो है के फ्रेमवर्क में क्या क्या इंक्लूडेड है. These are goods, services and intellectual properties. And it does so, it regulates the global trade by providing a framework for negotiating trade agreements which usually aim to reduce and eliminate tariff, quota and other restriction. So यहाँ पे जो framework WTO का है, it provides for negotiation. So जो inter-party governments हैं जिनके बीच में trade is about to take place or there is a dispute regarding some aspect of trade, all these things that will be done by negotiations. And then this framework it aims to reduce or eliminate tariffs, quotas and other restrictions. देखिए ग्लोबल ट्रेड है, इसका मतलब है कि यहाँ पे जैसे मैप दे रखा है, वर्ल्ड की जितनी भी कंट्रीज हैं दे आर ट्रेडिंग अमंग देमसेल्फ. कहीं पे कोई चीज़ ज़्यादा है, कहीं पे कोई चीज़ कम है. Let's say some countries they are bestowed with abundant mineral wealth. कुछ countries हैं जो agriculturally they are rich. कुछ countries जो हैं वो other spices में या फिर कुछ और products में, even services के अंदर, such as ताइवान का example लेते हैं, the semiconductor hub, the chip hub of the world. Then यूक्रेन की बात करते हैं, it controls around 48% of wheat supply. Then चाइना की बात करते हैं, it has control over global supply chain including the rare earth materials. फिर अफ्रीका की बात करते हैं, बहुत सारे मिनरल्स हैं यहाँ पे. सो ऑल इन ऑल अब इन सब के बीच में व्हेन ट्रेड हैपेंस, the primary purpose of any trade activity or any economic activity is to gain some remuneration and gain profit, reasonable profit. लेकिन countries अगर उनको पता चले that they have a monopoly of certain product, फिर वो they resort to the other tactics, other pressurizing tactics such as imposition of tariffs, quotas and import duties. So उन सबको eliminate करने के लिए एक global entity होना जरूरी है. वो entity that can reign over such, regulate such global trade parameters, and WTO is one such entity. Then the agreements of WTO they are signed by representatives and ratified by their legislatures. Then the members they have to adhere to the principles of WTO, and if they do not, then WTO has a mechanism, an independent dispute resolution mechanism to enforce these trade agreements and also to resolve such trade disputes. Then this organization it prohibits discrimination between trading partners but provide exception. Tariff, quota, restriction इन सब से है ना, countries or trading partners they do not discriminate between themselves, but there are other leeways, exceptions such as for environmental protection, national security, and other important goals for which such discrimination, such restriction can exist. Then WTO it officially commenced operation on 1st January 1995 pursuant to 1994 Marrakesh Agreement, and this agreement it replaced its former entity which was General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, that was GATT, which had been established in 1948 along with IMF and World Bank. Then the top decision making of WTO is the Ministerial Conference, which is composed of all members and usually convenes biannually. It means every 2 years. Decisions are reached by consensus and the administrative apparatus, which means day-to-day activities, they are handled by the General Council, which are made up of representatives of all members. Then a secretariat of over 600 personnel that is led by Director General and 4 deputies. It provides administrative, professional, and technical service. Then let's talk about how WTO is financed. So its annual budget is around 220 million US dollar, which is fed by contributions from members. Then let's have a look at history. So WTO precursor, its parental entity, GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, it was established by a multilateral treaty of 23 countries in 1947 after the end of Second World War. Well, you might have heard about the Bretton Woods Conference, जो सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर के बाद जो फाइनेंशियल रेपरेशंस के लिए एंड to assist in development, both these entities, World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they were established. That's why they are known as Bretton Woods Institution. And the United Nations system, it also tried to establish one such organization, which is comparable to the WTO in general. So this organization, which was known as International Institution for Trade, generally named the International Trade Organization (ITO), it was established by United Nations, but it could not start because other signatories to the United Nations charters, they did not ratify this treaty, and most of those signatories, most of those members of UN Charter, they had already established one such multilateral treaty that was by 23 countries, and this multilateral treaty GATT, it became a de facto international organization because ITO could not be established. So ये है इसका बेसिक. In short, यूनाइटेड नेशन सिस्टम जिसकी बहुत सारी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, WTO और GATT both are not a part of United Nations system, and this treaty GATT it was established by 23 countries as a multilateral treaty to handle the tariff and trade issues. And the United Nations system, even though it established many such agencies and organizations, and even though it tried to establish one such organization for trade by name International Trade Organization, but it could not be started. So that's why GATT became a de facto international organization to regulate trade and tariffs. And let's have a look at GATT negotiations before Uruguay round. So total 7 rounds of negotiation happened under General Agreement of Trade and Tariff GATT from 1949 to 1979. So the first GATT trade rounds from 1947 to 1960, they concentrated on first reducing tariff. Then the important round, the Kennedy round in mid-60s, it brought about a GATT anti-dumping agreement. Then the Tokyo round during the 70s, it represented the first major attempt to tackle trade barriers that do not take the form of tariff. So it's non-tariff barriers, which was handled by Tokyo round. And UPSC की perspective से these 3 rounds, the Kennedy round, the Tokyo round, and the Uruguay round, all are important. आप सब इसके बस just remember the initials. Then GATT के जो agreements हैं, they were not binding. So because of that, these plurilateral agreements, they were called codes. And the Uruguay round, it amended several of these codes and turned them into multilateral commitments that were accepted by all WTO members. So GATT के establishment तक uh, all such rounds and all such negotiations, they were not binding, they were not commitments. But later on, Uruguay round, which was precursor to the establishment of WTO, it amended all these codes and made them multilateral commitments. Then only four or remain plurilateral, which means their ये agreement अभी भी binding नहीं है. And those were those on government procurement, bovine meat, civil aircraft, and dairy products. Then in 1997, WTO members they agreed to terminate the bovine meat and dairy agreements, so leaving only two. So right now we have two open agreements on government procurement and civil aircraft. Baki sab, they have been either installed into the multilateral commitments of WTO or they have been terminated. Then let's talk about the Uruguay round. सबसे पहले हिस्ट्री तो 1980s के टाइम तक GATT members they had come to conclusion that the GATT system it was not adapting to the globalizing world economy. So in response to problems that were identified in 1982 ministerial declaration, and those problems such as structural deficiencies, spillover impacts of certain countries' policies on world trade. So all of these things which could not be managed by GATT, it led to the Uruguay round, and it was the eighth round held in September 1986. Then, in the biggest negotiating mandate on trade, the Uruguay round talks that aim to extend the trading system to several new areas to meet with the rising expectations of globalizing economy, especially in services and intellectual property. तो UPSC के perspective से ये भी important है. The Uruguay round it led to the initiation of talks on services and intellectual property, and ये दोनों points जो हैं that were later integrated into the WTO system. Then the Uruguay round also led to talks on reform trade in the sensitive sectors of agriculture and textile. Then after the talks were over, the final concluding act of the Uruguay round is to officially establish the WTO regime on 15 April 1994 during the ministerial meeting in Marrakesh, Morocco. That's why it is the precursor to WTO is also known as Marrakesh Agreement. Then GATT has not become a fossil after the establishment of WTO. It also exists as the umbrella body for trade in goods, and a total of 6 agreements were signed during the establishment of WTO. So this GATT 1994, it is the agreement that was integrated into the WTO regime, and this GATT 1994, it should be seen different from GATT 1947, which is the original agreement. The GATT 1994, it is just the updated version of this original agreement, and this updation it happened during Uruguay round. Well, UPSC के perspective से important नहीं है, but ये 6 agreements important है. The new WTO regime it adopted 6 such agreements. तो GATT 1996 1994 जो trade in goods है ये तो है ही है. Then the agreement that established the WTO, then TRIMS, which is the trade related investment measures, the second agreement. Then GATS, that is General Agreement on Trading Services, third agreement. Then TRIPS, which is related to intellectual property rights. The fifth one is about dispute settlement, and the sixth one is review of government trade policies. Then Uruguay round is also successful into establishing ceiling binding, which means the particular country tariff की limit कहाँ तक रख सकती है. So the Uruguay round, it has been successful in increasing binding commitment by both developed and developing countries on tariff ceiling binding issue. And let's talk about the ministerial conferences. So the highest decision-making body of WTO, the ministerial conference, it meets biannually, which means every 2 years, and this brings together all members of WTO. And let's have a look at some important ministerial conferences, such as first, the inaugural ministerial conference in Singapore 1996 and the inaugural ministerial conference in Cancun, Mexico 2003. Both of them, they involve agreement between developed nations and low income and low middle income countries, also known as Singapore issues, most of which related to agricultural subsidies. Then the Seattle conference in 1999 talked about workers' rights, the environment and social issues, and hence provoked large demonstration. Then the fourth ministerial conference in Doha, Qatar in 2001, it approved China's entry to the WTO and launched the Doha Development Rounds. Then the ministerial conference in Hong Kong, which agreed to phase out agricultural export subsidy and to adopt the European Union's Everything But Arms initiative to phase out tariff for goods from the least developed countries. So ये भी यूपीएससी की पर्सपेक्टिव से इम्पोर्टेंट है कि हांगकांग मिनिस्ट्रियल कॉन्फ्रेंस में the countries they agreed to phase out agricultural export subsidies and this adopted this initiative, Everything But Arms initiative. Then in the sixth WTO Ministerial Conference of 2005, WTO launched the Aid for Trade initiative to assist developing countries in trade as included in Sustainable Development Goals SDG 8, which is to increase aid for trade support and economic growth. And let's have a look at Doha round, Doha agenda. So the Doha Development Round held at the fourth ministerial conference in Doha, Qatar in November 2001. Then its aim was to make globalization more inclusive and help the world's poor, particularly the slashing barrier and subsidies in farming. So again, the issue of agricultural subsidies have come into focus और ये आता रहेगा. Agricultural subsidies का issue World Trade Organization WTO के matters में it often comes. The reason of which is most of the world's population, अगर आप Oxfam की report, if you might have looked at it, Oxfam की report के हिसाब से inequality में the 10% population is controlling 90% of resources. So यानी 90% people जो है they are controlling 10% of resources. And then people from middle income or low income countries, they usually resort to agricultural activities for as a economic mainstay. So ऐसे में उनके पास जो थोड़ा भी आता है, most of it may make sense अगर थोड़ा profit आए तो. But usually the developed countries, because they have a different take on agriculture and allied activities, or their idea is it is that agriculture it should be treated like any other activity. And उनकी कंट्रीज में अगर आप देखेंगे तो दे हैव लार्ज फार्म्स. और यही अगर हम मिडिल इनकम एंड लो इनकम कंट्रीज की बात करें, मोस्ट ऑफ द लैंड होल्डर्स, मोस्ट ऑफ द टेनेंट एंड शेयर क्रॉपर, दे आर स्मॉल एंड मार्जिनल फार्मर्स. सो उनका प्रोड्यूस जो होता है मीगर इनफ, वो अगर ट्रेडर्स के बाद आता है, ट्रेडर्स देन try to export it. लेकिन यही जो developed countries हैं, they try to block it by taking resources to barriers, tariffs, and जो low and middle income countries हैं, in which most of the population they are relying on agriculture as the economic mainstay. अब जो भी वहाँ की पॉलिटिकल गवर्नमेंट होगी वो क्या करेगी जब उनकी कंट्रीज का अराउंड 50% स्टॉक जो है पॉपुलेशन स्टॉक इट इज एंगेज इन एग्रीकल्चर एंड वो लोगों की वजह से पावर में है जो भी लेजिस्लेचर होगा जो भी गवर्नमेंट फंक्शनरीज होंगे सो उनकी भी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है टुवर्ड्स देयर पीपल एंड स्पेशली 50% पॉपुलेशन अगर एग्रीकल्चर पे डिपेंडेंट है इट कैन नॉट बी ओवरलुक सो दे ट्राई टू डू समथिंग फॉर द वेलफेयर एंड सब्सिडी इज अ पार्ट ऑफ इट अगर वो सब्सिडीज देते हैं देन डेवलप कंट्रीज दे टेक रिकोर्स टू द WTO dispute resolution mechanism फिर यहाँ पे वो टांग अड़ा देते हैं so this round this Doha round it tried particularly to slash those barriers and subsidies in farming then this progress over this round it stalled over differences between developed nation and major low income and lower middle income countries on issues such as industrial tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade, particularly between the European Union and the United States over the maintenance of agricultural subsidies. The core issue that is still um, stuck with among the WTO members, especially with reference to the Doha round. So the issue that the Bonis issue, the conflict, it is the retention of farm subsidies. Look, the issue is between two contradictory elements of the Doha round. First, the members they talk about free trade on industrial goods and services, but then they also want to retain farm subsidies. So I'm going to read the whole statement. The conflict between free trade on industrial goods and services, but retention of protectionism on farm subsidies to domestic agricultural sector. This was requested by developed countries, and then substantiation of free trade on agricultural products, which was requested by developing countries. All the three issues they remain the major obstacles. The problem here is free trade on industrial goods and services. WTO है ही किस वजह से? It is there so that free trade in all goods and services can happen without any hiccups. But अब issue यहाँ पे है कि industrial goods and services में free trade हर कोई ready है. But when it comes to agricultural products, so developed countries they want to retain farm subsidies to their domestic agricultural sectors, whereas developing countries they want fair market, fair share in market. So both the situation becomes contradictory. And contradictory क्यों है? First, जो developed country है, they have large resources. तो वो अपने जितने भी domestic agricultural sectors हैं, domestic producers हैं या domestic agriculturalists हैं, they can provide a lot of farm subsidies to them. और उसके साथ ही the producers of developed countries they can easily lower their prices. और फिर आप समझ रहे हैं इंटरनेशनल मार्केट में if somebody is lowering somebody is selling products which are of low price it means he is the king so हर कोई उसी से खरीदेगा so let me explain it by another way Doha round and the issue over agricultural subsidies सब्सिडी तो आप समझते हैं so there are two blocks developed countries and developing countries अब developed countries जो हैं they want to retain farm subsidies agricultural subsidies that they provide to their domestic producers. So अब domestic producer हैं, अगर वो अपने farm पे he is growing, let's say 500 kg of particular cereal. अब इस grain में the overall cost that he has met maybe around 5,000 bucks, whichever currency it is. अब इन 5,000 bucks में अगर वो इस इंटरनेशनल मार्केट में इज गोइंग टू सेल हिज प्रोड्यूस, उसको फर्स्ट कॉस्ट कंसिडर करनी पड़ेगी. सो ऑल इन ऑल अगर कोई सब्सिडी नहीं है, सो वो क्या करेगा, एटलीस्ट ये जो चीज़ है उसका जो प्रोड्यूस है इट शुड बी सोल्ड एट 12 bucks पर केजी. सो उसी हिसाब से 12 इंटू उसका प्रोड्यूस इट विल बी अराउंड 6,000 bucks. सो यहाँ पे अपनी कॉस्ट हटा के difference it will be his profit. So this is a simple calculation. अब let's suppose उसको गवर्नमेंट ने 3,000 bucks उसको सब्सिडी दे दी. सो उसका कॉस्ट जो है यहाँ पे अब टोटल पहले 5,000 कॉस्ट था इनपुट कॉस्ट, अब सब्सिडी के कारण अब उसका इनपुट कॉस्ट हो गया 2,000 bucks. अब वो अपनी प्राइस जो है वो कम कर सकता है. So his price, even if he slashes it by 4 and goes to sell on his produce at 8 bucks per kg, overall he's going to have 8 into 500, that is 4,000, which is double the profit. So सब्सिडी के कारण प्राइसेस भी कम हो गई और उसका प्रॉफिट भी डबल हो गया. अब सेम सिचुएशन डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज की लेते हैं. अगर डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज पहले ही जो गवर्नमेंट है रिसोर्सेज कम है, सब्सिडीज इतने अमाउंट में कैन नॉट बी प्रोवाइडेड, और फिर पॉपुलेशंस भी लार्ज होती है लो इनकम मिडिल इनकम कंट्रीज की, तो गवर्नमेंट भी जो सब्सिडीज हैं इट कैन नॉट बी डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड इवनली. सो इन शॉर्ट वे मिडिल इनकम एंड लो इनकम कंट्रीज की डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज की जो सब्सिडी होती है इट वुड बी स्मॉलर, it would be less, and because of that it is not going to make much difference to their input cost. Situation तो सेम होगी, सेम 5,000 इनपुट कॉस्ट तो इनका भी लगा है डेवलपिंग कंट्री के एग्रीकल्चरल प्रोड्यूसर्स का. 5,000 कॉस्ट में लेट्स से गवर्नमेंट बाय सम वे इट हैज प्रोवाइडेड 500 bucks ऑफ एग्रीकल्चरल सब्सिडी, सो उनका इनपुट कॉस्ट 4,500 हो गया. अब इंटरनेशनल मार्केट में बेचना चाहते हैं तो कम से कम इतना तो कहेंगे कि इनपुट कॉस्ट उनके ऊपर ना पड़े. सो कितना भी करके दे आर नॉट गोइंग टू गो बिलो 10 पर केजी, बिकॉज 9 पर केजी पे उनकी कॉस्ट ही है. सो 10 पर केजी एटलीस्ट 500 का या थोड़ा बहुत तो उनको प्रॉफिट हो. सो अब डिफरेंस यहाँ पे जो डेवलप कंट्री का एग्रीकल्चर प्रोड्यूसर है ही इज सेलिंग एट 8 पर केजी, and the low middle developing countries के producers हैं they do not have this laser, they cannot sell beyond 10 per kg, otherwise the whole economic activity becomes unremunerative. This difference अब international market में तो लिखा हुआ है grains पे that these particular grains that come from developing countries, and international market total anarchical situation, all it depends on supply and demand, and supply and demand that decide the prices. So यहाँ पे इंटरनेशनल मार्केट पे प्राइसेस जो हैं वो डेवलप प्रोड्यूसर्स हैं उनकी ज़्यादा है, वो मतलब उनकी डिमांड ज़्यादा होगी क्योंकि प्राइसेस इनकी कम है, देयर ग्रेन विल बी सोल्ड, और देन डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज के प्रोड्यूसर्स हैं, they need to slash their prices. Now let's come back to the chapter. So ये issue था WTO के दोहा राउंड में, and this issue still has not been resolved. Then let's talk about the functions of WTO. So WTO, the basic objective, it is promotion of growth by facilitating trade. Then other function, it oversees the implementation, administration, and operation of coveted agreements, and it provides a forum for negotiations and for settling disputes. So ये इतना important नहीं है. Next key publications 3 है World Trade Report, World Annual Report, World Trade Statistical Review. Then let's have a look at principles of trading system. The first one is non-discrimination, which has two major components. The first one is the most favored nation MFN treatment, and the other is national treatment. So the MFN treatment, it requires that a WTO member must apply the same conditions on all trade with other WTO members, which is if you have granted someone a special rate, special favor, then you have to do the same for all other members, which is a WTO member has to grant the most favorable terms, most favorable condition to all WTO members. This is the gist of it, the most favored nation. And this equation has been encapsulated in the statement, grant someone a special favor. किसी एक को special rate दो, special treatment दो, then you have to do the same for all other WTO members, which is a binding principle of WTO. Then national treatments means that imported goods, बाहर से कुछ भी आ रहा है, foreign goods, they should be treated no less favorably than domestically produced goods, which means foreign goods and domestic goods, they should be equal in terms. And it was introduced to tackle non-tariff barriers to trade, such as technical standards, security standards, so that the foreign goods or imported goods, they will not be discriminated against. So these two are principles of non-discrimination. Then let's talk about reciprocity, which is if you are allowing other countries, other nations to the access of your market, then they will do the same, or they are required to do the same. A kind of reciprocation, exchange kind of. अगर आप if you are providing concession, then reciprocal concession would be followed. So this is the principle of reciprocity. Then third principle is binding and enforceable commitment. So the tariff commitments made by WTO members in any multilateral trade negotiation are enumerated in a legal instrument which is known as schedule list of concession or schedule of concession. So these schedules, they establish ceiling binding. A country can change its binding but only after negotiating with its trading partners. So in short, commitments under WTO, they are binding and they can be enforced, and especially via this mechanism, the schedule of concession. अगर कोई country, दो country हैं, whether bilaterally or multilaterally, they are engaged in a trade agreement, then they have to decide the concession or decide the tariffs, and those tariffs, they cannot be changed unilaterally. Means अगर कोई country, it wants to change its binding, its tariff, it can change so, but only after negotiating with its trading partner. Then if satisfaction is not obtained, which means if unilateral changes are not acceptable by its trading partners, they can invoke the WTO dispute resolution or dispute settlement procedures. Then the fourth principle is about transparency, which means the WTO members, they are required to publish their trade regulations to WTO, And the internal transparency requirements are supplemented and facilitated by periodic country-specific reports, that is, trade policy reviews, through the trade policy review mechanism. So this one was the fourth principle, and the fifth, safety values. In specific circumstances, government are able to restrict trade, and these restrictions are permitted to members to, to protect not only the environment but also public health, animal health, and plant health. There are three provisions that are associated with it. First, articles that allow use for trade measures to attain non-economic objectives. Then, article aimed at ensuring fair competition. Members must not use environmental protection measures as a mean of disguising protectionist policies. And the third one is permitting intervention in trade for economic reasons. For all these three provisions, the safety policy of WTO principles can be established. Then let's have a look at the organizational structure. The highest authority is the ministerial conference, which meets biannually. Then daily work is handled by three bodies, which are the General Council, the Dispute Settlement Body, and the Trade Policy Review Body. Then let's have a look at decision making. So all decisions are made by member governments by negotiations. इतना ही important है. Then dispute settlement. So the operation of WTO dispute settlement process, it involves case specific panels. First, the panels जो होंगे वो case specific होंगे. Those panels that are appointed by dispute settlement body, the appellate body, and the director general, and the WTO secretariat, arbitrators, and advisory experts. Fair. The priority it is to settle disputes through a mutually agreed solution. That's what I mean, negotiation. Then case अगर panel के पास पहुंचता है, if it reaches the panel, then panel it should take not more than 1 year and not more than 16 months if the case is appealed. Because यहाँ पे आपने देखा है कि dispute settlement body के अलावा appellate body भी है. So dispute settlement may take 1 year, then the case may be appealed to the appellate body, which should not take more than 16 months. Then this process of dispute settlement, it is exclusive and compulsory to all WTO member nations. Then in the present circumstances, since 2019, the Donald Trump administration it blocked appointments to the dispute settlement body and the appellate body. Then the appellate body has been unable to enforce WTO rules and punish violators of WTO rules. Then in March 2020, the European Union and 15 other WTO members they agreed to a multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement, that is MPIA. ये UPSC के पर्सपेक्टिव से important है. Multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement, and this is an alternative appellate mechanism जब तक appellate body is not functional. Then accession and membership of WTO. So it is unique to each applicant country, and the terms of accession are dependent on the country's stage of economic development trade regime. So the process of accession it can take about 5 years, but it can last longer if country is less fully committed to the WTO regime or the principles of WTO. The shortest accession negotiation was of that of Kyrgyz Republic, while that of Russia it was the longest. Well, this is it. Thank you very much, and kindly subscribe the channel.